Hey there, guys. Good morning. Today we're going to take a quick peek at one of the most versatile offerings of AWS, and I think that is the S3 bucket. Um, I Before I looked into what Amazon S3 was, I kept seeing it, kept hearing it, and had no idea what it was. So um, started learning about it and started looking into it to see, does it make sense? What are the pros and cons of using it? There's so many different versions of it as well, so you can kind of make an educated opinion hopefully at the end of this video. So let's get into our instance here. I'm in the management console. I'll just look for find services and just type in S3, and I'll just click over to S3. Now I have a S3 bucket already, but we can actually just go ahead and get rid of this one because I realistically don't need this. So yep, up here, whoops. So let me empty the bucket and then I will do permanently delete. Okay. So there are many different S3 buckets and reasons why you would use different ones. If you go into create a bucket, you'll see right away you could just create one very quickly. If you want to copy settings from an existing bucket, you can do that. So if you have multiple and you need another one, this by default blocks all public access. So if your application doesn't exist on AWS, you need to uncheck this and set up proper security rules to make sure that you can actually access it. To do that, simply uncheck this and acknowledge that they're public. Now, don't worry too much because you'll create an IAM user that has a access token and a security key, and that'll be the only way to access this bucket. But you'll acknowledge that the current settings might result in the bucket and the objects within the bucket becoming public, so that's okay. You can enable bucket versioning, which is also really good if you are using it to offload some file share stores or something like that. Or if your application does a bunch of different changes and you want to monitor and make sure that it's not ruining things. You can enable server-side encryption, which would automatically encrypt the new objects in the bucket. So if you put something in there, it'll automatically encrypt it for you, which is also pretty nice. Then you can lock these into write once, read many model. So basically what that means is you'll put it there and you could read it over and over, but you can't keep writing it. And it prevents it from being overwritten or accidentally deleted for a certain amount of time. So those you can kind of create as you wish. You obviously have to give it test bucket. AWS, and I'll just put my own name there. Okay. So we have a bucket here that's now created, and it's ready for ingestion. So you can create folders, you can upload objects to the bucket, you can actually use this here to connect to it. You can look at the permissions and change things if you need to. So let's say that you accidentally did something, you'll then confirm it because obviously they don't want you to accidentally do anything. So yeah, relatively simple here, and it's very easy, actionable steps that you can take to set one up. It's very simple, and then from here, you would basically just connect the IAM user in the application you're using. So if you're using Veeam, for example, you can add the S3 bucket to a scale-out backup repository job, or if you have an application that's ready to ingest into it, you could do that. So let's talk a little bit about S3 and how it actually works. There technically is directory structure for how you store things, but in reality, all of the files, to my understanding at least, are stored just in a bucket. They're just in there, and the folder directory structure is there for organizational purposes, but it's not actually there as like there's no file system there. So realistically, it's just a bunch of files in the bucket, and that's it. The pros of this, I would say it's very easy to use, and you could set this up in minutes and start ingesting data. I'm pretty sure that GCP and Azure have their versions of this that are just as easy. The downsides are obviously, as always with AWS, is going to be the cost. It's very straightforward if you know your ingress and egress, because if we go over to AWS Pricing, there is a calculator for, where is the calculator? Yep, create estimate. So if you were looking for the S3, and then we go ahead and choose just the regular S3 standard, you'll see here this matters, right? Your put, copy, post, list requests that you're sending to S3. So if your application is doing a lot of these, you'll incur a lot of charges, and this is per file. So if I take, let's say, 150 gigabytes per month, and I'm using 10,000 put, copy, post, list requests, and then the get and select and all other types of requests, let's say I only do 5,000 of those. And so you can see here that it's only 350, right? So but this is 10,000. So you really have to know your application and know how many requests it's making. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of guess those. It's very similar to under and over provisioning hardware in my eyes. When you go out and you have an application, you don't really know exactly what kind of hardware you need to run it on. It works, and it's there, and it's very transparent. However, you need a very in-depth understanding of exactly how your application works. So for example, if I'm going to be using this to, let's say, store image files after my application scrapes them from a website. And so let's say I'm looking for a specific car on Craigslist, and I'm using an application that scrapes Craigslist, and it's going to go ahead and return all the pictures and the data to this. I'd have to know exactly how many put, copy, post, list requests that my application is going to be using, and how many get and select requests. So it's very interesting math that you have to do in order to understand exactly what your application is doing and how many times are you going to do it, and things like that. So if I'm running that scraping job maybe once every hour, and I don't put any exceptions for things that are already there, and it's overwriting, it's going to be a put request, so you have to really be on top of your application and understand what it's doing. So it's a good system, it's a very good service, it's a very good offering, but it's just extremely expensive, because let's see what happens when I add another zero here. Realistically, nothing changes too much. And then if I add another zero here, again, nothing changes too much. But if I go ahead and switch this to terabytes, you could see, let's do my 236, get rid of a zero. So realistically, you'll see that it's not too much of an increase in charges, but let's say that you only budget for 5,000, and then you go ahead and do 250,000, which is possible. It's over by whatever your budget is. It's very insignificant in my opinion, but I've heard and I've seen people express dissatisfaction with the fact that there are ingress and egress charges. Realistically, they don't make too much of a difference, as you can see here. Like the difference was between a whole zero was like 12 bucks, right? So does 12 bucks actually matter? That's going to be up to you. If you add another zero, you see, so it gets exponentially worse and worse the more zeros you add, obviously. But who's going to have this many put requests? It's really going to depend on your application, as I said before. So if it's doing constant workload where it's just pulling data all the time 24/7, it could possibly go over. Let's see, what's the max you could put here? Yep, right there. So you could pay $5 million for an S3 bucket. Wouldn't that be fun? But yeah, so I think it's a really good system. I think that it works if you need it to. It could be something that you store, for example, if you take all of your data from, let's say you have a bunch of firewalls and you want to offload their configurations. You could provision an S3 bucket and just drop all of the configs there at the end of every month or at the end of every week, or if you have Juniper, you could do, I don't really know about Cisco too much, but in Juniper, you can set them up so that you could have archive on commit. So anytime you make actual changes to it, so that would decrease the amount of storage you utilize, and put request lists and stuff like that. All those requests would be cut down to a minimum because you're only doing it whenever you make changes, which as we all know, it's very infrequent to make changes to a firewall unless you're setting it up for the first time. So yeah, that is a quick synopsis of what S3 is, and we'll continue looking at smaller offerings of AWS, and eventually we'll get more and more in depth, and we'll take a quicker look at all of the other ones, and eventually we'll have a good understanding of exactly what you can do with AWS. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment below, subscribe, and like the video for the YouTube algorithm, and I hope to see you guys next time.